Still on the subject of anniversaries, and you could be perhaps forgiven for not knowing that this year marks the 175th anniversary since the colony of South Australia was established. And while the state government describes its funding of the commemorations as modest, others are using terms such as pathetic. Paul Clarick reports.
My first reaction was that it's really amazing and I haven't really seen anything like this before.
Because it's very fascinating to learn all about this stuff that I've never learnt before.
This is destined to become one of the few lasting memories marking the 175th anniversary of European settlement in South Australia. A new permanent exhibition at the Maritime Museum in Port Adelaide.
We've long had an exhibition that looks at the experience of coming to Australia by sea, and we look at the minutiae of shipboard life. And we've added a layer of original materials, and we have a particularly rich collection of things that people brought in 1836 on those first 9 ships.
The Bound for South Australia exhibition traces the journey and the aspirations of the 546 people who set off on 9 ships in 1836 on an epic journey into the unknown.
Many of them, in a way, were motivated by economics. They left a land that was very poor, where they saw very few opportunities, the Dickensian England, and they hoped to kind of dream of a yeoman farmer, that they would be able to buy land, something they couldn't do at home.
Most agree that the anniversary is worth celebrating.
It gives us an opportunity to reflect. And if you think there's huge community interest in our history, we always find there's great enthusiasm, but people always say that they don't really know all that much about the origins of South Australia. And the more we find, the more we get to know, the more there is to be proud of in our past.
But many also believe that not enough is being done to reflect that pride.
Both parties in government have an appalling record on these celebrations. If you compare us to other states, especially New South Wales, which has spent millions on celebrating the events which New South Wales people thought were important, we've done very little.
This is how South Australians commemorated the state's 100th anniversary of European settlement back in 1936, reenacting Governor Hindmarsh's landing at Holdfast Bay. In 1986, this was how the 150th anniversary was marked, with a gala concert at the Victoria Park Racecourse. The Maritime Museum and the Migration Museum were also established in 1986 to celebrate the 150th. Just $230,000 have been allocated for this year's birthday commemorations, mostly for local government and community groups to organise their own functions. There's also a website and an exhibition at the Migration Museum in November. Since 1986, some of what the state did have has been lost.
We propose to make it one of the most exciting museums and displays anywhere in the world. South Australia has a unique constitutional history. This was the first place in the world to combine manhood suffrage and the secret ballot, only the second place in the world to have votes for women. It has an exciting constitutional history that people really ought to know about.
We even had the Liberal government simply close down the old Constitutional Museum, known as Old Parliament House. Now, that was only one of 2 in the world, but it was closed down for, I can't think of any good reason at all.
The History Council of South Australia was one of a number of groups which made representations to the state government about how this year should be commemorated.
We thought that the proposals which have been tossed around for quite some time now for a Museum of Adelaide should really have been taken up, and that this would have been a very good occasion.
Independent MP Bob Such also called for a museum similar to those in Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne to record some of this state's achievements.
And we should have a place where people can go, tourists as well as locals, to celebrate what has been achieved here.
With history now back on the national schools curriculum, it's also believed there's a need for local information for local students.
A Museum of Adelaide would help to ensure that the South Australian students who study history as part of the national curriculum won't study simply the history of the eastern states.
We have one of the most interesting political histories of all the states, and yet it's simply being ignored and forgotten.
Keep away,